John Carpenter's The Thing preys on a lot of common fears, of the unknown, of isolation, of enclosed spaces. But at its roots is a smallness, an insignificance established by the movie's opening shot of space. The men of Outpost 31 are dealing with something ancient, technology, biology, and life far advanced beyond the pale of human experience. As the Thing begins to hunt and absorb the men, we're reminded of what a human is, not in a spiritual or philosophical sense, but in a literal one. Bones and tissue, porous bodies made mostly of water just one rip away from spilling. To be human is to be fragile, breakable, a collection of organic material at the mercy of a chaotic universe. I think, in some respects, The Thing is damn near a perfect horror movie. Its sluggish fades and iconic eerie heartbeat soundtrack masterfully build tension. It also maybe has the greatest non-human actor in the history of cinema. The crew's first hostile encounter with The Thing happens about a half hour in, and even once they've dissected what they're up against, it's too late. The paranoia has set in. The pinks, purples, and blues that so often mask characters and light the screen lend a sense of otherworldliness, a mood sitting somewhere between mysterious and terrifying. At the end, when the dominant color becomes a hazy orange, you'd believe the survivors completed a descent into hell. Famously, after The Thing crescendos for the final time, after manly man Kurt Russell cusses at a centuries-old alien before blowing it up, "Fuck you too!" The Thing ends quietly and ambiguously on a question with an unknowable answer. So how would one go about gamifying paranoia, body horror, and the slow crawl of the Thing's terror? Well, after impressing the powers that be at Universal, the answer came in 2002 from Computer Artworks. The Thing is a really interesting game, although it's definitely a game from 2002, before third-person controls were more streamlined and largely before video game narratives grew into what they are today. There is a lot of bad in The Thing, and a lot of good too, and that good is surprisingly good. If you've read online about The Thing being an underrated horror gem or a forgotten classic, it's not all internet hyperbole. Playing The Thing brought to my mind comparisons like Dead Space, The Thing, of course, being a whole 6 years in one console generation before Isaac had to shoot his way through necromorphs. Where Computer Artworks deviates from Carpenter the most is its tone. 2002's The Thing prioritizes action right alongside its horror. There are shootouts, boss fights, and a finale that has you gunning down a skyscraper-sized thing beast from a helicopter. AI squad mates who suffer the effects of fear and whose trust in you will rise and fall imitate the character dynamics of the movie. Blake, our protagonist, is about as early 2000s super gruff video game action men as they come.
I'm not doing anything until I get some goddamn answer. Sure, Doc, follow me. Oh, and keep your ass covered. I'd hate to see you get an unwanted suppository. I might be able to deactivate the security gate with the correct switch sequence.
The Thing gets its formula right more often than not, and when focused on atmosphere, tension, and scares, it's extremely good. Blake and his squad mates are deployed to investigate what's happened at Outpost 31, a predictable enough premise that leads to a relatively predictable plot. The game opens with a brief sightseeing trip around Outpost 31, showcasing many of the film's famous locations and letting the ambience take hold. The first enemies don't attack until about 30 minutes in. Until then, Computer Artworks lets you explore around and immerse yourself in the film's frigid, decaying ruins. Where distrust and tension between characters was central to Carpenter's narrative, The Thing gamifies these elements to the point of superficiality, and I've got a lot of mixed thoughts. Squad mates come in 3 types: soldier, medic, and engineer. Considering all the stuff that can happen at once purely on a mechanical level, The Thing's AI seems to do a solid job behaving correctly, at least most of the time. Soldiers are combat buffs that do well in a fight, so much so that the game manual recommends giving a weapon to them even if it's your only weapon. Medics will patch you up, sometimes before you've even realized you've taken damage, and engineers fix door panels and the like. As long as your squad mates trust you, you can give them a few basic orders like stop and follow or take weapons and ammo away from them. A squadmate that distrusts you won't listen, and it's up to you to convince them. Usually, giving a distrustful NPC a weapon with some ammo does the trick. All told, there are actually a lot of ways the game says NPCs can come to trust or distrust you, which would seem to open the door for all kinds of interesting dynamics. Blake can administer blood tests to prove his humanity, and if worse comes to worst, even coerce a stubborn NPC into following an order by pointing a gun at their head. When put into practice though, gaining the trust of your allies isn't all that difficult. Give them a gun and some ammo and they're usually fine, as long as you don't accidentally shoot them. There's certainly a high level of effort on display here to make your squad mates feel human and vulnerable. Effort that's impressive even to this day. Squad mates clearly and consistently exhibit signs of fear and disgust and constantly comment on their surroundings. As their leader, you have to manage those emotions. Walk into a room that makes a squad member nervous and it's a good idea to back out, get what you need on your own, and continue through. Don't do a good enough job and your squad mates will lose their composure and may even kill themselves. Problem is, your squad mates aren't characters, they're one-dimensional NPCs displaying a single emotion at any given time, like Sims stuck in a horror game. As you progress, the same squad members don't stay with you. Instead, you end up meeting other random NPCs, and as long as you give them a weapon or heal them up, they'll follow you just fine. The movie is all about the trust and tension between its characters, like McCready and Child's rivalry, or how Clark is positioned as a red herring. Without characters, there can't be any character dynamics. In The Thing, trust becomes a one-way street. Squad mates can be the Thing and turn on you at any time, and visually it's actually pretty cool. But when and if they turn, you're given plenty of time to react, and they don't attack you with the weapons they have. So there's really not any downside to giving an NPC a gun, to trusting an NPC, besides the fact that you may be low on ammo or weapons, and even then, because the game is action-oriented, weapons and ammo are fairly abundant. The Thing turns trust into a status bar and body language into emotes that range from appropriate to silly and even distasteful. By doing so, The Thing sheds much of the thematic depth of the movie. The best moments these dynamics play out in are scripted, and while cool, it makes you wish they'd play out organically and unpredictably as well. The few characters that do have plot-relevant dialogue don't do much to shore this up either. Blake's sort of rivalry with Pierce ends in Pierce's suicide, a death that attempts to wring terror out of morbidity, comes across melodramatic, and again, results in a portrayal of suicide that isn't exactly delicate. Colonel Whitley, who emerges as the game's version of Dr. Blaire, betrays Blake before we get a chance to decide whether or not to trust him, all the while driving an underdeveloped plot about an evil corporation and dubious scientific tests on Thing material to turn it into a weapon. Regardless, The Thing is a horrific joy, a game not all that hard to imagine a modernization of today. Its biggest problem might be an unwieldy 20-year-old control scheme. The console version has a couple different control layouts, all of which push actions around to buttons that definitely aren't associated with them today, and may not have even been back in 2002. The control scheme I used set the left trigger to crouch, the A button to fire, and the right trigger to first-person view. While The Thing's camera controls fairly close to what you'd expect from a third-person shooter, combat is mostly done with an auto-aim that takes some time to warm up to. Blake is not a fast character, he's a little sluggish, but Thing monsters are quick, especially these spidery-type guys that also happen to be the game's most common enemy. In a tight room with little space to move, or if you're trying to hit enemies at an awkward angle, combat can get real janky. Since friendly fire is enabled, you better believe you and your squad mates will end up shooting each other if things get sufficiently congested. Crouching improves Blake's accuracy substantially and can keep you out of the way of friendly fire. If you switch to Blake's first-person view, he can only lean but not move, so it's best used for moments where you need some precision and aren't in harm's way. While smaller enemies are killed pretty easily with bullets, larger Thing beasts require a two-step approach. First, you have to chip away at their health with bullets, and then finish them with a flame weapon. A big action-adventure it may be, The Thing is not a run-and-gun shooter. Through a lot of these hallways and corridors, you're taking your time, shooting at enemies as they come and swapping weapons when the situation dictates it. While standing, Blake fires his flamethrower at the ground a few feet in front of him, and he won't target enemies automatically like he does with other weapons. To fire forward, you either have to switch to first-person view or crouch. The upshot upshot here is that you're conditioned to constantly fight crouched, especially with the flamethrower. But the benefit to Blake aiming the flamethrower at the ground while he stands is that it gives you a pretty easy way to strafe and block enemy paths. Thing beasts are rabid, but they aren't suicidal. They will, well, fight for their own survival. So you're blocking multiple paths while fighting off smaller enemies and keeping larger ones at bay. Because the flamethrower doesn't range very far, you get really great tense moments where you're waiting for flames to fizzle away before a thing beast charges and you let loose with the trigger. The thing, both in its combat and in general, is at its best when it's at a measured pace. Running around Colonel Whitley's secret lab, figuring out how to unlock doors and trapping thing monsters in rooms might be the best part of the game, if not at least my favorite part. You're not under constant attack and you're given time to think and explore. When the thing ramps up the action, it really starts to struggle. Its 3 boss fights are some of the worst boss fights I've ever played through. They're visually uninspiring, awkward combat sections against a towering thing beast that slaps Blake around until you've done enough damage. The first 2 are in cramped rooms that the controls have serious difficulty navigating, and the final boss fight, funny enough, has an exploit I found almost as soon as the fight started and immediately took advantage of. As the thing nears its finale, it shifts focus further to action, and shootouts with human enemies become the main avenue of combat. It's an unfortunate pivot where combat really starts to break down and becomes more frustrating and repetitive than scary or challenging. Human bad guys occasionally just sort of run at you, but sometimes they'll shoot at you from a distance. It's inconsistent, and as human enemies become more common, the thing loses a bit of its charm. It devolves into a substandard third-person shooter. We also get a few segments that are way too long. You can only save your game at audio recorders, which, for the most part, are adequately spaced out. Enough that your actions matter between saves, but not to the point that you're constantly saving either. Toward the end, though, there are a couple sequences that really spread out the save opportunities, severely increasing difficulty. As with its shift toward action and human enemies, I interpret this as an attempt to make the final hour and a half or so a big, exciting shoot-'em-up. The result is a lot of frustration and tediously replaying the same sections. However, as imperfect as a game The Thing might be, and as much as I enjoyed it despite some of those imperfections, what's occupied my mind the most about it is this frozen guy. I don't know how Keith David keeps finding himself wrapped up into video game history, but here we are. The helicopter that flies Blake around Whitley's final form is flown by none other than R.J. McCready. So what's the implication here? That's tough to tell. Computer Artworks takes the ending of the film, pushes a few pieces around, and doesn't offer up a solid answer either. In doing so, though, the room for speculation grows. Like, okay, if McCready was the thing, why not just kill Blake here and be done with it? Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean Childs was the thing either. In fact, if he were the thing, he'd be fine since we know the thing can survive being frozen, and Childs' body was seemingly unharmed. And see, now I'm doing it!
You believe any of this voodoo bullshit?
Credit to Computer Artworks for not outright and completely filling in the mystery, which must have been tempting, but Carpenter's original ending is pristine, a flawless final moment that should never be altered. Unfortunately, Computer Artworks, who had begun work on The Thing 2, shuttered in 2003, another victim of the volatile and unpredictable monster that is the video game industry. Certain elements of The Thing have stood the test of time, and others haven't. Ultimately, its legacy, in my mind, is far more positive than negative. An action twist on survival horror that is legitimately unique and enjoyable, even by contemporary standards.